Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to another design review, language completeness and consistency, looking at post version 13 Wolfram language. All right, let's start off with WithLock, returning dollar timed out.
Right. So this is something that, there have been a couple of things that's been discussed a couple of times. So we had a big survey of things that return dollar timed out and basically nothing was. And we decided that failure objects were better. And, I have here a couple of examples. So find equational proof returns a failure with the literal tag timed out. URL read doesn't use that exact tag. In fact, it's a little weird that it both issues a message and returns a failure, but
I don't think that's bad. I don't think that's a bad policy thing to issue a message, but I do think that it would be nice to standardize the failure tags if we can.
Right. And so
has anybody looked at that, the failure tag zoo at this point?
Not in any sort of comprehensive way. No, we haven't.
Well, what do you mean by failure tag? Do you just mean a thing there that says like connection failure?
Yeah.
Okay, because I think there is a mechanism for failure. Maybe we should make this easier, where you can basically give it a message name, if you know what I mean, and it will put it in the tag and stuff like that. I know some functions like to do that.
It's not in the tag. The way it works is that there's a first argument is a tag, second argument is an association, and the message name is in the association. So the tag makes it very easy to pattern matching and stuff like that. The message name, not so much. And it, at least when we first designed it for interpreter, it should not be much relied on, because some cases you might have the same message name, or rather different message names for the same kind of error, just because we wanted the failure to format differently in a form. Like,
okay, so hold on. So what you're saying is that, wait a minute, where's the tag?
It's the first argument, connection.
Oh, failure. I see. Okay.
So for example, to give an example, if you're doing a restricted of integer and you restrict over even number or odd numbers, you get a different message name just because we want the text to look nice.
Right. So message template would, can either be a string template sort of thing, or it can be a, like a message name that is, and its template is looked up.
How does it
and
know?
used.
Is it a message name wrapper? Is there a message name wrapper?
I think it's just a use set delayed, or rule delayed, I mean.
No, but
yes, message name, right? Foo : bar, right? It has a full form of message name symbol comma tag. No. General : whatever. If you look at its full form,
is message name.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so what you're saying is, if I say general : stop.
Yep, and you look at its full form.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. But so what Christopher was saying was that in here it'll be message template : greater than general stop or whatever,
right?
And then the message parameters is what's fed into that,
right?
Okay.
By the way, I mean, maybe one thing that might be nice, I mean, if we think that the paradigm of throwing a message and then returning a failure is sort of should be promoted, then yeah, I mean, then it might be nice to have a function that, or maybe even just some usage of failure that basically does that. I mean, where it takes similar arguments to message and maybe some others, and then it will print the message and turn it into a failure object too.
But we don't. But we want the message printed at the time when the failure occurs internal to the function, whereas the failure, printing something, the failure will only be disgorged at the end, presumably. Maybe that's not right.
Well, I mean, it's just like, message returns null, but it could return a failure object.
Christopher, right, by the way, there is some general utility function that does exactly that, eats a failure and prints a message out of it.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I know there's functions that like take a call to message and then turn it into a failure object or something like that too. So yeah, I mean, it seems, or like take a failure object and turn it into a message. And yeah, I mean, general utilities is a bunch of stuff with this, I think.
Okay, you've raised the question, should message return a failure object as its value?
Well, I was going to argue that maybe there'd be a usage of failure. Well, I don't know. I'm not sure if you can really do that with message, because I'm sure stuff relies on it returning null.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so I mean, the whole message system is pretty antediluvian. I mean, for example, is it still the case that that the text of a message has to be a pure string?
Yes.
Well, it has to be a string, but of course that string might include linear form constructs.
Right. Well, I mean, the template needs to be a string, but of course you can give any parameters you want to that string.
Okay, but for example,
just, by the way, a problem with failure is that because failure, depending on how you put the arguments into failure in some hair splitting way, it will either use string form like message does, or it uses what a string template, which can't insert arbitrary stuff in the same way. But that's a different issue.
You mean in the way that it inserts things in message template?
Yeah. So if you set a message template, and then you use the and then for the message parameters, you use an association instead of a list. It uses string template, and string template can't insert things in the same way that message uses string form to insert things, which lets you insert, summary boxes and whatever the heck you want in a string. But string template doesn't let you do that. It has to call to string on them, which, yeah,
this sounds like a quintessential LCC issue, and it should be investigated because that seems crazy. And I mean, I've got a question. The WFR function, when you use an obsolete one and it gives you that message that says press this button to get a new one, what is that? How did that get implemented? And it's still pretty ugly. Do people know what I'm talking about here?
Approximately. It's not something I've ever seen, but I've heard you describe it before.
Do you know how we can generate one?
Not off the top of my head. I think we need Bob S or somebody like that.
Well, I can just guess a function that will have been updated. I mean, I think
yeah.
Or maybe you could just do the full form of a resource function and then edit the version number. I don't know if that would work, but it might work.
Right, well, but assuming there's a literal button in the message, then that's presumably a button that's written in linear syntax. But of course, I don't think we want,
Hey, this is a trivial thing for Avery. Could I just make a comment that the function repository should have something that says, in addition to recent functions, there should be a section here for updated, just for what it's worth. If Avery could make it.
Yep, we got a note of that.
Pass it on. Okay. In any case, sorry, what were you saying about?
Right. So I'm saying that presumably this button, if it's really part of a message and not just something that it's cell printing, then it's presumably using linear syntax, or possibly inserting the button as an argument into the message template. But of course, I don't think we want. Right. I mean, messages also need to work in a standalone kernel. So, having a string template that, will either convert things to output form or standard form, depending on, whether you're in a standalone kernel or a notebook, is a pretty good thing. If you start allowing people to create, row of grid of,
well, why can't we render that? What happens to that in a standalone kernel? That works just fine.
Well, I guess row of grid is fine, but then people start doing pane of panel of whatever.
Well, what do those do in a standalone kernel?
They format as pane, open bracket, blah, blah, blah.
Even an output form?
Yep.
Well, maybe that's the place where there's a problem, if we really care about those things. Well, okay, but let's come back to this. The original question here. Okay, so there's several different issues. One is the investigation of failure objects and whether they are consistent in the way that they're handling different kinds of objects for message template and message parameters. It's one thing. The second thing, what is counter?
That must be data that that URL read stuck into the failure object. So you're allowed to add whatever additional metadata you want into the failure object, into the association. Yeah.
It's recording that there.
Right. So maybe that's how many times you've tried, or I don't know. I mean, we're supposed to have somebody like Joel or Fahim here who can answer these questions.
I noticed both of those people were here.
Okay.
I do not. I don't know why counter is there.
Okay.
By the way, this reveals its bugginess because that shouldn't say 1 second, obviously, but presumably this code should have just had a quantity object fed in as a parameter to the message here. And if
Sure.
so, why did it do that?
Because it was written by Jonathan, who's not, super expert, I guess. I mean, we can fix that.
Yeah, okay.
Well, another one.
That's just a junior developer error that wasn't caught.
But actually, just to bring up the point again, I mean, I think if he did it where he inserted the 1 second using an association for the message parameters, which then makes it use string template, then it also might not have formatted right using a quantity. I'm not sure. Like it might have formatted, turned it into a string as quantity of blah blah blah, as opposed to turning into.
So you're saying if I say string template of, hello backtick, and then I feed this as an argument.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure what that will do. It probably depends on what the default insertion function is. Okay, that's pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
But that's how it would have formatted depending on how he put his message parameters in, as opposed to 1 second.
Okay, let's return to the issue. So first point is, we believe that message continuing to return null as print does, there's no choice about that. That's point 1. Point 2, I mean, wouldn't it be nice if there was something more like echo that was a messagey type thing? Or does that not make any sense? No, it doesn't make any sense. Never mind that. I mean, you could imagine something that is, for example, for confirm, you can imagine something that you wrap somehow. Okay, if a confirm is going to fail, is there an easy way to make a message from that?
What do you mean by that? I mean, confirm generates a failure object when it fails, if you know what I mean.
No, I understand that, but I'm asking the question, if you wanted to print something in real time when a confirm triggers, when a confirm does not confirm.
That's very easy. You just put it in the second argument. The second argument only gets evaluated when the confirm triggers.
I see. So you would just say, so it's not a wrapper, but you would put, what would you put there? You would just say, is it a function? What is it?
No, it's just just an expression, because that's the information field that will get given to the failure object that eventually gets propagated up to the enclose. But it also only gets evaluated. It's like the second argument of first, right? Where it's just an expression that only gets evaluated if it's needed.
Okay, but the fact is you are generating a failure object, and there could be some way of just saying, message something about the failure object, given that you know what the failure object is.
What exactly do you mean message something about the failure?
Well,
object?
I mean print, just like here, we're printing a message that is connected to the failure object.
Oh, I see.
And the code is separate here between, in other words, there could be some mechanism to just say, whenever a failure object is generated, print something associated with the generation of that failure object. So in other words, we could even have a thing that.
Well, I think that should be dealt with. So that should be handled at the enclose level, though, right? The confirm should fail because basically the argument structure of confirm makes it very hard for it to take things like options. So I think what should happen is that confirm should do its thing and return up to the enclose, and then the enclose should, handle whether it wants to throw it back out as a message.
Fair enough.
If there was a function, for example, like there is in general utilities, I think, that just takes a failure object and basically converts it to a message, then you would just put that in the second argument of enclose and it would do it.
Okay, so maybe we need that function, but it's not quite echo failure. It is something that says, message. Well, message failure sounds wrong, but what it is it's just taking the failure object and
maybe message could take a failure object. I mean, it can't return one, but it could just take a failure object.
It could take a failure object. Why not?
Although I'm not sure what structure it needs to have in the failure object in order to actually throw it as a well-formed message.
Well, I mean, the failure object already contains the message template and arguments. So there is.
Well, it can be a string. So
Yeah, but
right. It might not be a message. It might not have a message name. Is the point?
Well, then it has to give a generic one. Then we could do. That's a good idea. Message could just eat a failure object.
Well, but by the way, what one other point maybe is that any time, there's a strong urge, I think, among developers to be like, oh, we should have, you want to be able to write your message, the body of the message inside of the code where the error is generated. But then every time this is brought up, someone mentions that for localization, the messages can't be just strewn about in the middle of the code. And so if we have something where you can throw arbitrary failure objects, without providing a message name, without doing that, then that could be an issue.
You mean a developer control issue, so to speak? I mean,
well, no, it's a user issue, right? So we have Japanese messages and we have Chinese messages, and the way this works is we have the message tag, and then all messages are supposed to, of course, they're not, but they're supposed to be put in the central messages repo, and then the localization team knows they need to translate these messages into,
May
Japanese.
I suggest a procedural change here? Why don't we just admit it's English first? The English version is in the code. The thing is harvested. We harvest plenty of things for documentation and so on. Just harvest the stuff from the code, and then the message : name : language stuff, which is the localized version, is then inserted based on that harvesting. Is it not inserted in the code, but it's inserted in a central location as a secondary representation of the message?
Yeah, but then you're scanning the entire code base all the time for that. That can't be.
And you're complicating the process for DQA.
Well, so
and
what?
And also which strings, right? Now, right? Because there are cases which are not great cases where the message is literally backtick 1, and then the actual message text is in the second argument of message. And so, and then you can go further and imagine that actually that's a variable that's constructed through string concatenation or something.
Well, how does that work right now in the centralized message?
It doesn't. It's just broken.
Right. I mean, that's not localizable to start with, so that's not.
Yeah. Okay. So we don't.
This is what I mean. Is about how people already. There's I know several, I think in the compiler and other projects like that. They just do this, and basically the messages aren't localized. But I mean, there's a strong urge that people, developers want to write the messages in the code. I think that
having messages in the code is useful. I think it's helpful in having the code be correct. It's easier to maintain. It is something we do in the documentation all the time, is scan the whole documentation base, which is pretty big at this point, for things that require consistency changes. I don't see the problem of doing that.
Steven, I think there's another issue here, which is like this thing where the message is basically backtick 1, backtick, and then it's filled in via code. It's literally like you have some logic for plurals and whatnot that actually performs some computation to produce the correct message. That stuff requires an entire framework for localization. Like we would need to standardize that, I think.
Yes, but we don't, which we've done some of for Wolfram Alpha, but we haven't done in other places. Okay, look, the fact that we can't solve.
Right. I mean, we're not going to solve that today. So I would like.
So let's zoom out to what we actually are solving. We want message to take the failure object as an argument. That's a good idea, I think, and we probably need some examples and then close of how to use that. I think that's one takeaway. Another takeaway is I personally support the idea of just, doing what people have been doing anyway and saying you put messages in the English messages in the main code and we have a harvesting process. I mean, we don't have the right people in this meeting to discuss that idea, but I think that's a good idea. And the third thing, the actual question that was asked here about WithLock returning $timed out. The argument here is that it should in fact return failure object, not $timed out. Is that correct? And is anybody supporting the idea that it should return $timed out?
Well, the fact that it times out isn't really an error. but I mean, it means when you use WithLock, you are prepared for there'll be several processes who fight for a resource. And so the question is, if you're not willing to wait forever, then you may decide, I wait for 2 seconds. And if I don't get a lock, I do something else and I return, or I give up. So I don't really care what it returns, as long as it's something that is extremely easy to test for. And if it's some failure object with 100 of different cases, then, I mean, failure objects are nice, but they are so general that for one, we should really have some internal guidelines for how we create our own failure objects. And if it has a unique tag like timed out, then failure of timed out is just as good as dollar timed out.
Okay, but let me argue why failure is a better option, so to speak, as opposed to the usual failure is not an option. But why failure is a better option is that things like confirm immediately know how to deal with failure. Whereas I doubt that confirm knows, in other words, if it's dollar timed out.
The point at the bottom of this section is that confirm probably should support dollar timed out, which is
it's a question. I guess I left off the question mark, but it was I mean, this was a question that was raised in the last conversation and we didn't have Christopher, so right? I mean, the direction we were heading in was that dollar timed out would be sort of a symbol for users to use, and system symbols should use failure objects. Now, should confirm also do something with dollar timed out? I guess I don't have a strong opinion.
What else does confirm? What other special cases does confirm deal with? It probably deals with aborted.
Yeah, aborted, maybe canceled.
Canceled, yes.
You'll have to look at the ref page. I can't. Sorry.
Dollar failed, surely, right?
Yes.
Yeah, dollar failed. Anything that's failure queue, dollar canceled. I think also missing.
So wait, dollar canceled works with confirm, but it's not failure queue.
I think it is not. I think it's not failure queue. I'm not sure. There are definitely some
I
things
know
that are
it's not failure queue. But...
Well, clearly this list, it would be consistent to add dollar timed out to this list. But what is dollar timed out? Does dollar timed out have a life, or was it introduced for this one function?
It was something that was introduced many years ago, but then never actually really used by anything. So you wanted the reason this all started is you wanted a survey of dollar timed out versus time constraint, and we surveyed what uses nothing. I think there might be a string argument timeout in some things, but there's not a symbol timeout, and dollar timed out isn't actually right. That generates an actual abort. Right?
I think someone's not on mute.
Yeah, I think they were just muted. Right. So
actually, maybe.
Right. So So time constraint here literally aborted the computation, and that abort bubbled up and you can handle it however you want to handle aborts, which if you do nothing
is that
dollar aborted.
With what we are discussing here?
Not
Shouldn't
really.
It return a failure?
Yes, but I think that ship has failed.
Well, not only that, but I mean, this is no different than you typing pause of 10 and then after 1 second deciding to hit Control-C and you get dollar aborted. Right? I mean a literal abort was generated.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is there was no failure. Everything operated as intended, right? I mean, unless you consider it, unless you think of time constrained as a thing that's to protect against stuff failing by running too long.
That argument is similar to WithLock. WithLock has the same issues. There isn't really a failure. It's just timed out based on the lock.
So maybe this is a bit of a crazy, I'm not sure if this makes sense, but maybe we could even do something where the tags in the failure objects are symbols. It's like the tag, instead of it being quotes timed out or something, it would be dollar timed out, which would have the advantage that 1, you can document dollar timed out, and 2, you know that everything that times out is going to use the same tag, which makes it easier to test for.
I'm not sure why it's an advantage to have it be a symbol, other than it kind of raises the stakes for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that you know that all the dollar timed outs are going to be the same, as opposed to it being quotes timed out or time out or, you know, evaluation timed out or whatever.
Well, but I mean, we can also standardize the strings. Okay, the next question is, if we look right now an inventory at failure strings, failure tags, what do we see? There's no easy programmatic way to get all of those, is there?
Nope.
It requires scanning the code.
So we have, right. I mean, I think, you know, there are sort of consistent families within areas of implementation, right? So interpreter has it, which was the original user of failure, you know, has it set. I think the URL foo family of functions has a relatively consistent set. Image processing, maybe Carlo or Shadi can speak about that, but I think Dave.
We don't return failures though.
You don't return failures yet. Okay.
Yeah. So
what
we
do you
use
return?
Sometimes failures internally. We still have the unevaluated return to be.
Right.
Which has issues that maybe should be discussed at another point.
Okay. Okay. So what further things are there to discuss here? The question is, should WithLock return $timed out, which honestly is beginning to seem more consistent. If confirm supports $timed out, if time constraints returns $aborted, and so on.
Okay, that's right. But then what's the rule that distinguishes between the things that return failure objects and things that return $timed out? I mean, I can tell you why time constraint behaves differently, right? It's because a literal abort was generated, right?
Yeah, I know.
In WithLock, there's no abort, right? It's doing some stuff and then it decides, okay, I'm done.
Yes,
and,
well, URL read also, look, in a sense, WithLock and time constrained are front and center time constraining type functions. Whereas URL read is mostly, I just want to read a URL. And if I return something other than that, something went wrong. As opposed, I mean, I could make an argument that these functions, WithLock and time constrained, are, you know, they're intentionally time constraining functions.
Well, they're not really time constraining. WithLock is not a constraining function, right? It's ensuring, right? It's
okay, fair enough. So WithLock,
it's a negotiation function.
Right. WithLock is another example where, like URL read, you know, the timed out is sort of a failure, I suppose, or
yes.
Maybe you can argue, I don't know.
Right. It didn't execute expr because it wasn't able to get the lock within the, you know, time, you know, time limit that was specified.
All right, you're making a reasonable argument that that should return a failure object, which is, I think, the original discussion here.
Yep.
And that the secondary issue is the standardization of tags within failure objects, which requires an inventory of what the tags actually are right now.
Yep.
Yeah, if you want me to change WithLock to return a failure object, it has to be standardized, documented, and extremely easy to handle.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, well, I guess one question is right. Well, I guess why do you need something special, and in particular, how would you have why is why is the fact that it returned $timed out special? I mean, what if the user wrote some function that returned $timed out? So would it be better for this to be like a WithLock timeout or something? The tag. I mean, you can certainly do.
Well, right, you're arguing. Look, there's two different directions here,
right,
which probably suggests segmenting the tags.
Right.
One is Christopher's claim: it would be nice to know generically that something timed out and therefore have a timed out tag. And your point, there are different shades of timing out. I'd like to know which one of these it was.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how do we deal with that? I mean, unfortunately, and this relates to a thing we've discussed several times recently, you know, the underground tunnels of failure are less well programmed than the above ground what the program was supposed to do. And that's always going to be a feature. You know, there are very few people who are going to write as carefully all the failure paths as they write the success paths. And therefore, you know, the best we can do is to provide sort of heuristic I don't know. I mean, in other words, the people who are going to care about those shades, the question is, what will be a case where one would care? Was this a timeout? I think that's probably more important than the shading of this was a with lock timeout as opposed to something else. In other words,
right.
if you're going to bother, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with that, but you didn't give Roman a chance to actually answer my question, which is, right, he's insisting it's super important that he be able to easily identify this dollar timed out. So why does he need to do that? And does it matter if it's a timed out from WithLock or a dollar timed out from, the user function, which happened to return dollar timed out?
Now, if I decide to use the time constraint option, then it is because I think that the lock, I'm willing to handle the lock not being available within some time, and then I need to catch that and do something about it. I might just return an error to the calling code, or I might do something else, or have a loop, try again. So I would expect any code that uses WithLock and the time constraint option to test for that time constraint.
Okay, your point is this: a failure might be generated. The actual return value of expr might be a failure object, and you would be deeply confused if you had given a time constraint. You got a failure object. It's like, where did this failure object come from? Did it come from my time constraint, or did it come from just the natural evaluation of expr?
Yes, but I mean, that's true for probably 90% of our code. I mean, any code that returns $failed will mess up the failure handling of the enclosing code.
Well, it said, no, I don't think that's the right way to do it anyway, because, with lock of WithLock could end up, having the inner WithLock generate a dollar timed out, but
yeah, but then you test for it before you return the outer one.
Exactly, right? You've got internal state to the WithLock implementation that tells you that it was WithLock that timed out, and not that expr returned dollar timed out and therefore it timed out.
Yeah, I mean, if you really wanted to insist on that, then probably the best way in terms of programming would be to generate an exception and not return something when the timeout appears. Then you can handle the exception. But that has some issues if that happens. If somebody types this on top level, then there's no handle for the exception.
I mean, I understand that I'm in the minority, but I have deep objections to that just because of the number of Java programs I've written where somebody didn't bother to put in the exception handling. Sorry, I've used where somebody didn't bother, and all of a sudden I'm seeing this random stack trace, and it just aborts, even if the stack trace happens to have nothing to do with.
How do we even generate an exception? What would we mean by generating an exception?
Well, that would be like a throw or of some kind, or something, or maybe
Yeah, throw, confirm, assert, anything of that.
What is the, Christopher, did we ever put in a guaranteed failure confirm?
I think you mean like confirm never? No, we didn't, but I think it might be worth doing. I know this has been requested a few times, and we sort of said, like there was one at one point, I think it was called confirm never, and then we kind of took it out because it was like, oh, we can just run confirm assert of false or confirm of dollar failed. But I've heard enough people say they want it that it might be worth adding in again.
Confirm never just seems like such a bizarre construct. Okay, so I'm not quite understanding what to do here. The argument for dollar timed out is that it is a little bit, I think it's a bit dangerous that the innards of a WithLock could return a failure, but not be because of timing out. I mean, they could return a timed out as well, like a nested WithLock or something like this. Comments, what do people think we should do? So we got these two choices. Either it's a failure object where you expect, I mean, the only way that you know that WithLock failed is by looking at its return value. And therefore, that would require people who look at the return value to go look at that failure object and check that it matches a pattern, which is kind of ugly.
Although we could just, right? I mean, if WithLock, right? If WithLock returns, connection fail. Well, I mean, first of all, people do that all the time, right? Because they want to know what, how it failed or why it failed. But also, WithLock, if it always returned failure of quote timeout or even failure of WithLock timeout, if we really want to particularize it, although I don't, based on the conversation, I don't think we need to do that, then all you need to do, it's a failure, and I believe you can get you can do first on it, but I think there's also a sub value to just ask for the tag. If there isn't, I think there should be, right? Because you can do failure of properties to get extractable properties.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. If there was a unique failure that would identify that failure with lock timeout or failure of timeout, and there was an easy way to test it. I mean, that was the second of my requirements. And at the moment, it doesn't seem to be that easy to say, is this a failure with a particular tag?
Well, it's first. It's first.
Well, at first you have to test whether it is a failure, and then you have to look at it, and that is kind of clumsy.
Should failure queue, missing queue have some tag parameter to check for what kind of missing, what kind of failure?
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, so failure queue, right? I don't know that Christopher did any work on this, but at a previous meeting about the general issue of confirm and friends, we decided that we need sort of a second argument for failure queue and missing queue to what we want to consider, and that certainly could include being a specific tag, but also sort of classes of like maybe only $failed and $aborted and missings are fine in missing.
I think it's a good idea. I think that will be a solution here. So that the
wrapper.
Yeah?
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying the wrapper around a WithLock will be a failure queue. The test will be failure queue blob comma timeout. Quotes timeout. Testing for that tag in the failure object.
Yeah, that seems like an elegant solution.
But now, okay, I guess the maybe one question is this thing we talked about a while ago, probably about a year ago actually, about having sort of certain arguments like abort, quote aborts or something like that in the second argument of failure queue. That might conflict if we also have if you can also put a particular tag, if you get what I mean. Like, is the second argument, you give it sort of a class of types of failures, or is the second argument a specific tag? Because I think we can't really have both.
Is it a name? Oh, well, I mean, you could have both if one of them was a symbol. If $failed, if failure queue of X per comma $failed, it's kind of crazy because you could just say X per equals $failed.
Well, I suppose we could allow, sort of simple patterns, right? So, right, if you blank failure or blank missing, if you want to be sort of more specific, I'm trying to find. Yeah, since this was close to a year ago, I'm trying to look up the ticket right now just so I can refresh my memory on exactly what it was we decided.
We could have something where it's just we could also have something where if it doesn't know, if it hasn't heard of quote aborts or if it hasn't heard of timeout, then it will assume that you're just talking about a tag, and otherwise it will. If it does know, but a general class of errors, it'll test for that, which might be useful also because then you could have it so that failure queue of blah, 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 comma, quotes, timeout or timeouts or something like that. It could match both a failure object with timeout, and it could also mask $timeout, right?
Yes. But my question would be, one of the issues is, if there is a class name, you're saying people who write failure objects should avoid the class name. But unfortunately, that's a slippery slope because one can imagine adding a useful class name at some point in the future after people have written a bunch of failure objects that happen to use the name that corresponds to the class name.
Well, maybe every time, maybe if there is a class name, right? Like if I've defined timed out as a class name, maybe failure queue, comma, quotes timeout matches both failures that have that tag and anything in the class.
Yeah, that's probably reasonable. That would be a reasonable way to do it. Fine.
Because I can't imagine a time you have quotes timeout and you don't want it to match a failure with that tag. So
I agree. All right, that seems reasonable. It's a little bit heuristic, but the fact is, again, my claim is as soon as you go subterranean dealing with the error cases, it's going to be heuristic. If you expect it not to be heuristic, people are going to wind up, they're just not going to write that code. They're not going to do that as carefully as they do the main above ground stuff. And they're just going to be happy that we caught something that they thought we might not even catch. All right.
Nope. Okay.
Let us move on. All right. Our next topic.
I did want to say on the subject of going through the code for all the messages for localization.
Yes.
If the plan is to include arguments to message, not just the message name, then I would talk to the Wolfram Alpha localization team for their experience with doing that kind of thing.
Sounds reasonable to me. What is your summary? Can you summarize? It's been good, bad, indifferent, horrifying.
It's what I mentioned before, where there's, it works, but there's the risk of not properly identifying whether a string is intended for code or whether a string is intended for
I understand. I'm telling you, this is going into the sub basements.
Yep.
This, and let's get the main cases because,
and also Packlets do support separate message assets, and so there's really no excuse for putting the messages right inside the code anymore.
Well, maybe we should provide a utility that can extract things for Packlets to make it easier for people, because I think there is an argument for putting the messages inside the code, because when you're reading the code, for example, the messages give you some clue about what's going on in the code, and if you have to go indirect and find it in some other file, you might not do it. You might.
Well, but you should at least use message tags, and so you already have.
That's true.
I mean, and the message tag, whether it's at the top of the file or in a separate messages.m file, it will usually start out at the top of the source file before the initial release. Then you should really clean up the mess and then put it into a messages.m file.
I don't know about that. I'm not convinced. I think we should leave them in the code and have it be harvested. Perhaps it has some special comment or some special tagging.
Well, there's those logistical issues. There are also some implementation issues with how messages are looked up. All I'm saying is let's not have this discussion now.
Right. Okay. Let's move on. JSON and Data Set.
Right. So we have two formats, right? We have more, but they're more specialized, right? We have the original JSON implementation, and then we have the newer JSON implementation written by Dorian. And please don't skip ahead because there's a point here.
Okay. Right.
Right. So they both, in most cases, and that's sort of a key point that I will get to later, import the same data. And sort of if you take the raw JSON result and just wrap it in Dataset, you get this nicely formatted dataset. If you take sort of the default JSON importer, you get this very ugly and slow to format thingamajig, which I know maybe is a bug in Dataset because, right, they're basically the same shape, only one is association and a bunch of nested associations, and the other is a bunch of nested lists of rules. So I'm not sure why. Right, and so the complaint is, it's hard to import JSON nicely and easily because you either need to know to use raw JSON and then wrap it in Dataset, or do fancy, map association everywhere. So that's the background. So here are so let's go now that we're all understanding what the starting point is.
Just so I understand, the complaints are the word raw is unfortunate, and people would prefer raw JSON to be the default for JSON. Is that one of the claims?
Some people would like that, yes.
Okay. And the second complaint is that lists of rules, and the reason we had lists of rules for the JSON return, maybe associations didn't exist at the time, but even if they had.
It did not.
Okay, but maybe.
But the other issue is
repeating. The repeating.
Exactly. That is the other issue.
That's what we're getting to.
Okay. All right.
Right. So question number one, do we want to change the default association of JSON import? So there's obviously a large backward compatibility issue, and not all JSON files can be represented because of the repeating keys. And so this is a question for Dorian. What does happen in raw JSON? Can it catch this, or does it just drop the duplicates, or what happens?
To be honest, I don't remember, but I think I'm constructing the association. So
whatever association does.
Yes, probably. So
I remember
maybe
discussing
the last
at some point. I think it does. I think you're right. You just construct the association, and then the association zaps the earlier versions of the keys. Now, I think you might want to have an option, or there might want to be yet another JSON format which has something which changes the keys to have a -2 or something if they are repeated.
Or maybe it just has it just merges them, right? Like it just gives a list for every key.
I see. So it has a merging function.
Or leaves it the same as the again. Lots of the other sort of outside JSON importer exporters have the same problem. Nobody handles it exactly the same, but you document which way you handle it.
Yeah, but that's not good enough. I mean, people might actually want. I think the merging function. I mean, we have the capability of doing a merge.
It technically changes the structure of the data.
And again, I think
have a list.
Yes,
I think that's all fine as long as it's clear what options do what to it, right?
Fine.
I prefer having separate elements or an options that you can choose to get a list of rules or an association. You should be able to get both.
That's a reasonable.
Well,
point.
why not? Well, I mean, you could maybe also there could be don't we already have an option called merging function or something like that somewhere? I mean, maybe that could just default to last, which is I think what association does. But if you set it to identity or whatever you want, then you'll get all of your
probably
keys.
need to be
well, by default, it shouldn't do any merging. But if you opt in and use some, merging option, then that would be fine.
Right, but I'm just saying, by not doing any merging, that's equivalent to merging function arrow last. I mean, that's how merging function works, I think, in other functions.
There is.
I mean, that's how merge works. Oh, well, that's how. There's some function I think that.
Yeah, I know there is.
It's like an association reverse or something like that has. Sorry.
The persistence symbol, I think, has a merge function option or local symbol.
Oh yes, local symbol. It's definitely
persistent.
Oh, persistent
values
symbol.
do have a merging function. So if you look up a value and you find values at different scopes, then the question is, how do you construct a return value? So by default, it uses the most local one, but you might also want to use just a flattened list of all of them, things like that. So the merging
that's
function,
different from association merging, I guess.
Yes.
Okay. Never mind then. I mean, I thought we may have already had some option that does association merging. I thought
there might be a system option.
Oh God.
But
no, let's not touch that.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything's gonna blow up if we touch that.
Exactly.
Okay, so hold on.
I mean, by the way, if there isn't, I mean, that's something that we should have. I mean, there's several association functions that need that anyway, like association, like one of the usages of association map and stuff like that, where you can get things where you have key collisions, and right now it just takes the last one, but often you don't want that.
But why can't we use merging function? Why can't we start introducing merging function for that purpose? Seems like it does the same thing.
Well, it sounds like it does.
Well, I don't think we can use it literally in association, just because.
No.
But in things that eat associations, I think that make or return associations
or produce or generate associations.
Exactly.
Seems sensible to me. I mean, I don't see why we can't use this exact function, merging function. Seems like it has exactly the right behavior in the way it was used in persistent symbol. We just want to expand on that. Okay, so question here. All right, so what Sean is suggesting, which I agree with, is different elements that give either an association. I mean, we could just give a data set directly back. What would happen? Yeah, I see. So the issue is when people just say import JSON, or they don't give an element at all, they just import a file that's a .json file. The complaint is that what comes back is not as beautiful as it could be.
Right.
That is annoying. I agree. That is annoying.
I think there is also some value in the way it currently works in that it's kind of lossless.
Yeah, exactly.
The other things we're talking about are either structure changing or straight up lossy. So,
well, fair enough. But that might suggest then that it's simply an element to JSON rather than this raw JSON idea. That the things we want, like an association of data set, whatever, become, we say import blah 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 .json, comma data set.
Right. Although if it's going to be structurally different, I think then we do want to merge the formats. And of course, there's no cost to continuing to support raw JSON as a synonym for JSON. But right, I think we would want names for, import as the current JSON, import as the current raw JSON, import as a data set.
Yes. Okay. Fine. So those become elements of the JSON case.
Right.
And with raw JSON, just a convenience thing, a top-level convenience thing.
Exactly.
That's fine.
So I have a question. Why does Dataset not support a good visualization with list of rules? What is there something?
That is one of the questions I raise in possible resolutions, and maybe Jose can say something about that. He's probably our biggest expert.
Has never done it. There is, I think lists of rules are not the same thing as associations, and Dataset has always been based on associations and lists being the main
right.
contributors.
In particular, the extractors for lists of rules are not the same as the extractors, although lookup works on a list of rules.
Yeah, I mean, many, right? Keys does, values does. Many of the association functions will treat. Yeah, I suppose I don't know if it's defined what they do if you have duplicate keys, like if you do.
But part, for example. So part.
Oh well, yes. With part, they're right. They're really quite different.
Right. My question is if the dataset element is going to support those duplicate keys. Is it going to behave more like the list of rules or the association? Which is why I think if it was an option, the option for control for associations and datasets, whether or not you delete them, we could use something like delete duplicates, which already exists in CSV.
In my opinion, it's very easy to go from the list of rules to the association, if that's needed. So it shouldn't be the responsibility of dataset.
I'm sorry, you say it should not be the responsibility of dataset.
Exactly.
Because you just wrap association around it and it makes it an association.
Right.
But then the question is...
That's a duplicate killing operation.
That is correct.
You have to wrap it in association.
That's correct.
But I think it's happening.
What?
I mean, if you wrap a list of rules with association, you know what's going to happen. So you have control over it. So you have the decision.
Right, but yeah, but it's not. But if what you have is already a nested list of rules, making the replacement is not super easy, right?
If it's nested.
Exactly, right. In fact, would replace repeated work in this case?
Who knows? I don't think so.
Not how you want it to. No.
Yeah, I'd use replace exactly, and then zero to infinity.
Yeah.
That's pretty ugly.
You end up with your sort of custom matching rules.
Okay, look, listen.
Yeah.
That if the main thing is we're going to get nested rules from JSON import, clearly what should happen is there should be a dataset element for JSON import. There should be a merging function or delete duplicates option that will control this issue about what to do with the duplicates. I mean, I think another thing people might want is generate a message if there are duplicates. That makes sense? I mean, get rid of the duplicates, but generate a message to tell you there was a duplicate, because it might actually be just a bug.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think Sean needs to come up with a list of potential element names, which are and/or options that control essentially getting the thing we call JSON into these various forms that include data sets. Okay, and we potentially downgrade the value of raw JSON and upgrade the value of JSON, dataset, basically. Does that make sense?
That seems sensible to me.
Okay. All right. Then I think that's what we should do.
Okay, but we're keeping the current default element because
I don't think we can change that. And I think the lossless round trip is a good argument for it, and I think it's fine.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I mean, by the way, what we could do, and this is a user assistance thing, when you type in, here's a possibility. There's no reason why import, if it sees you type a .json file, couldn't bring up something that is essentially a suggestion about import elements. See what I'm saying?
Right. John, do we have an infrastructure for that? I mean, I think we have some.
No, but what kind of suggestion would it be?
Right.
So I would imagine, I don't exactly know. I mean, it would be probably something, I haven't thought about it, but it will be something where you're basically making a suggestion about what the potential next argument would be.
Right. Well, I mean, and would you do this before somebody writes a comma? I mean, if somebody writes a comma, I think we can, I mean.
Well, I was thinking it'd be nice to give some indication before you do the comma, like there's a file.
No, well, okay, you can't just look at the extension because import uses file format, which has all kinds of other heuristics and stuff. You can't always just look at that much.
No, I understand, but if there is an extension, if there is an explicit extension, then you have a fighting chance of suggesting the right things.
You do, but you wouldn't want to give a suggestion for a format that it's not actually going to import as. So if you type after this comma and then list and give a format, then you can give good suggestions.
No, but then you've lost the game. No, look.
Not really. That's how you specify elements.
I'm well aware. I'm well aware. Right, but I'm saying the point that I'm making is we are trying to message to users the fact that they just say import of the file and they don't know to use elements. And then they say, oh, it's a really ugly import. What am I going to do? I'm lost. Right. So if they type JSON, making the suggestion that they could type as the actual thing to import, JSON, dataset or something. I haven't thought this through. This is a user assistant thing. It's just a suggestion for how to educate users on what the possible elements are. So they're not. Go ahead.
I agree that that's useful. I think it might be useful in more scenarios than just import. And I think I understand what Sean says about format guessing. If you want to suggest elements based on just the extension, I think it has to be very clear, assuming JSON format, comma something makes sense. So indicate that it might be, it is a guess.
I mean, you can do that by having the thing it's suggesting be JSON, dataset. And if you know it isn't in fact a JSON file, you know that would be the wrong thing. So I don't know. I'm not solving this, user assistance problem right here. Okay, can we move on quickly? We just have
Yeah. Yep. So this one, I think it's. I don't think this is as big an issue as I thought at first, but I think this is partly a communication problem, and that not people are using a lot of the same words, but not perhaps necessarily using them the same way. Right, so we have these things that are sort of like controls, like molecule draw, that pops up a little interface that you can use to create molecules, but it's not written in a way where you can.
What the heck? I thought I was getting some kind of ringy thing. It's very unaromatic.
Okay.
I don't understand this.
Okay. Well, Jason can speak up. I will not criticize nor defend the implementation of molecule draw because I've not. It's been a long time since I looked at it, and it was very early on when I offered.
Okay. I don't understand what it's doing here. I don't understand why this ring thing isn't. Why I don't get a ring. Now I do get a ring. Okay, that's a bug. I clicked on ring and I didn't get a ring.
Well,
it wanted me to.
I mean, it's acting like a tool. Which is to say you click on it and then you click where you want to place it.
Well, no. I think what happened is he just clicked on the sort of drop-down generator, and that didn't change the tool.
Yes, that's right, exactly. It didn't do anything until it had dropped down. That's just a UX bug. Should get fixed. Okay, so what's your point? So your point is this has a return here.
Right. So I guess this right. So I guess this is sort of right. It's blocking the kernel, and then it returns this thing, and it's not very nice to integrate into forms or manipulate. And I guess there's this other thing that exists in the cloud, but I'm not familiar with it, with geoposition picker.
Yeah, there's this thing that people in WP have been developing for getting a nice little map in a form. And the problem is that it's kind of difficult to integrate if there is no equivalent thing in the desktop. So I don't have a symbol to use when I do the form specification. Even if it's automatic, it should have something like input field or slider.
Yes. Well, you could certainly make it a string for the time being, but I agree that it needs that.
And it's not, I mean, it's not terribly difficult to do something that almost kind of works on the desktop. That does, it's basically a locator pane with geographics, with dynamic geographics. But I mean, zooming in and out doesn't work, but it's almost there. And I think, I mean, at some point we had this kind of summits about, current value and remote value and what different controllers for sensors and stuff would look like.
Yes.
And then we kind of lost that very nice and consistent thing we were doing, and random groups started implementing things with slightly incompatible interfaces. So I think it is a consistency issue.
What were we calling? Sorry, the thing. Oh my gosh, what was it called? The thing you just mentioned. The thing that had
remote value or client value.
Client value. That was the idea. So client value had this possibility where, okay, you are taking a picture, for example. There are multiple things you could do. You could take a whole movie and start the movie, take it, finish it, send it in. You could capture the current picture. You could have something where it's where you take a picture and then you submit it. You could have something where it's continuously ingesting the picture and sending it to the functions and so on. And so we had a taxonomy of those different, I think there were 4 or 5 different cases.
Yes.
I think we're using a magnetometer as the standard example, where you either want the current magnetic field, you want to wave the thing around and record a time series of magnetic fields, or you might want to take a reading and then subsequently feed in the magnetic field.
Yeah, but it's not just sensors. Like, for example, there's no reason why we wouldn't have some kind of molecule picker that binds to a dynamic and then can be used to manipulate or in a form.
Yes, I understand. So your point is that we could generalize this client value thing to saying, do you do the picking offline and then you say submit it now, or is it more like a dynamic where the picking is being dynamically fed into the function continuously? Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, that's the continuous action option for input field, for example.
Right. So I mean, we sort of have those things here, right? So like image capture brings up this interface, and you can,
as opposed to current image, which just takes the picture.
Right. So current image just takes the picture and returns it. Dynamic of current image, is continuously taking a picture and drawing it in the dynamic output. And then image capture, on some level, it's nice, right? It prints out this little interface that you can click on to take a picture, but then you can't programmatically do anything with that picture you've taken, because it's basically copied to the clipboard. So you can, or maybe you can save it in a file and paste it, but you can't sort of programmatically use that.
What did we think about for client value? We had a mechanism for using that. Yes, I think we had a
discussion in possibly relevant links.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is,
I think we're going to run
pretty old. It's 2015 on Twiki.
Oh, for goodness sake. Well, I think I've got these files because I've got I mean, at some point we renamed it client value. I think I've got a whole folder of stuff about client value. Yeah, here we go. There we go. Lots of stuff. What's the dates on these? Oh, 2015.
One's from 2017. Really
recorded values. Packet capture, yeah.
Oh, I forgot about that one.
What's that?
Yeah, the Carlo B's case is when it binds to a dynamic, and I think it's nice because it's the one that I can use in forms and that Lou can use in manipulate. So,
all right, this is a more complicated discussion. Somebody's got to go through these files. Avery could pick them up and send them out to people, the ones from that directory. Perhaps it's time, it sounds like it's time to finally get client value under control and implemented.
But I'm not sure that the client value is the right name for something, which is
I'm not sure it is either.
The point on a map.
I'm not sure it is either. I'm not sure it is either.
In fact, I'm not sure client value is the right name for anything unless you're evaluating, how much money a company is giving us, right? Right. I just don't know how to parse that.
I didn't even think of that. Okay, but
like remote value, I can understand. Okay,
let me explain why it was called client value. Okay.
Okay.
It was called that because one imagined that there were things that were locally being computed on a phone or a browser. That was the client device was doing a computation.
I see.
That's the idea. Now, what you're generalizing
as long as it's not running X. If it's running X, it's the server device.
Exactly. I was just thinking that, John.
Can we call it term cap?
Yeah, right. I can tell you some interesting history about X and the person who wrote it, but anyway, that's a different story. Anyway.
Right. So you had this client device, and that's why you were calling it client value. Okay.
That's correct. But generalizing it to these controls like molecule drawer and geo picker or whatever, geolocation picker, geoposition picker, seems completely sensible, and it's the wrong name for that. And in fact, the very fact that we haven't implemented it for 7 years does suggest that its importance on client devices like phones is not as great as I imagine.
There was a point in time when I think we deliberately down prioritized this as things on the phones in terms of the kind of capabilities we wanted to expose weren't going in quite the direction we initially thought. I don't think it was accidental.
Right, but I mean, what we imagined was people who want to do like simple data taking would do it on their phones. And it didn't help that on Android phones, for example, there were many devices that were accessible on iOS phones that were not at that time. And we had in mind, but then obviously take a photograph on your phone and upload it, that's a thing. But measure the barometric pressure or something on your phone and automatically feed it into something, automatically feed it into a form, or automatically feed it into an API has not become such a thing.
Oh, one more thing, the drawing tools that when you have graphics and you do,
yes.
Are those available in any way programmatically?
Yes, there's a function called Canvas that does that.
Yeah, and it's going to grow a bit in the next release.
And that's okay. How? But can that bind to a dynamic?
No.
Should it? Or maybe with another name?
So it's documented to either well, I mean, it has a documented output form.
Right. So those are right. So that just right. The moment he started editing it, right, it split from the original input cell and became its own input cell.
Why doesn't that work?
Steven evaluated
John, why doesn't that work? Why doesn't that work?
Do normal.
But why shouldn't that work?
Why should it work?
Because it's an obvious thing to do.
Graphics of graphics
doesn't work.
Yep.
Yes, it does. Graphics of graphics will work, doesn't it?
No.
How could I have not done that in all these millions of years? I mean, most other things like that, like graph. Yeah, it works. There it is. Like graph works. If you
can you have it as a graphics primitive, like if you have other graphics along with that graphic?
No, you could have to put it in an inset.
I mean, if you unformat the cell, there's only one graphics box there.
Yeah,
right?
it works because of evaluation.
Yep.
Not because of typesetting.
Okay, but I mean, graph does this, and this is something you should expect. That you can say graphics of graphics just like you can say graph of graph. I think graphics.
Right, but right, the canvas isn't a graphics; it's a canvas, right? And you can't do graphics of graph. I don't think. I think you can use show to convert
let's see,
a graph into a graphics.
Yeah, I just tried it. It doesn't work.
Probably
right,
should.
But I think if you do show, if you do show of %%, then it'll.
Okay, I think that's a bug. I think it should work. Is that a graphics now?
Orange border.
Yeah. This should work. Graphics of that thing should work. And graphics of graphics should work, and graphics of canvas should work, and so on. There's no reason to not have these.
Graphics of image?
Why not? I think that does work now. Shadi, can you comment on that? Certainly if I do image of this, what happens if I do image of graph?
Graphics of X plus Y?
No, probably not.
Graphics of graphics 3D?
Yes, that's worked for years. Yeah, that worked fine.
No, the image of graphics works, but graphics of image.
Graphics of image doesn't work. Image of graphics works.
Okay, the main issue
But
with graphics
image
of
of many other things doesn't work.
Well, because you have
we
to
have rasterize for that.
Okay, the issue with graphics of image is it doesn't know where to put it. So we either make the decision that default
among many other things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, the whole, okay, let's take this raster and convert it into a bunch of vector directives.
No, we're not going to do that.
No, that's going to be a raster.
Yeah, it's just going to be a raster sitting.
Oh, I see.
It's just purely a question of whether it has a coordinate system or not.
Well, you may not realize this, but graphics or graphics 3D does quote work, but it doesn't return a graphics. It returns a graphics 3D.
Really? That's weird.
Yep, I just tried it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, in the PostScript days, yes, I remember what we used to do in the PostScript days, but in a PostScript world, that would have required a kind of, sort of a Manhattan
renderer.
project.
Yeah, right, a huge project, right? Yes, I understand. To make a two-dimensional vector thing out of that. All right, we are profoundly running out of time. I think that we need a discussion about things like graphics of graphics, graphics of image, and so on. And we need separately, probably a custom meeting to talk about the future of client value-like things. Makes sense? Of basically how to return values. The main issue is this. You've got a thing, it has a user interface. How do you return a value from it? Because there's one form of interaction, which is using the user interface. And there's another channel, so to speak, which is actually returning programmatic values. And we've handled that nicely for the things which are dynamic controls, where we're bringing up the user interface and it is continually and dynamically sending the values into the actual back end, so to speak. But we don't have,
and we have, there's another analog which is maybe purer than some of the others that have been raised, which is system dialog input versus file setter.
Yes.
System dialog input returns this result. File name setter sets its results to a dynamic variable. Yeah.
Right, but I think we need a more standardized way of making that dichotomy and a couple of others. So that's a thing for another time. I think that should have its own custom meeting. What is this about? Oh, this is.
It's fine. I mean, this one we'll get to this. It's just not.
I thought Rodentifies as was IES.
Oh, I see. Sorry. I wasn't aware that there was
official spelling. Sometime we should make a glossary of some of these names like Rodentify, because it's been with us for 30 years now. It's not going away, and it's a useful concept. I don't know what else you would call it. It might have some name in can't even imagine what field would have been given it a name. Mathematical logic wouldn't have done so.
Can you explain what it is for the uninitiated?
Oh, Rodentifies just means, does the function burrow down inside the expression?
I mean, it's like listable, but for things other than list.
Yes. Is it a burrowing function? But it was slightly more whimsically named. Okay, we should wrap up here. Thanks, everyone. And
okay, thanks.